Here, brother.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you having me. It's cool to be here.
Absolutely. So today we're going to discuss mental toughness and going to get some nice tidbits from Jonathan on it. And maybe we can touch on the 80-hour work week as well, which is one of the
Sure.
topics that I talk about on my channel. So first of all, maybe you can introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what you do and take it from there.
Awesome. Sure. My name is Jonathan Cohen. I am an attorney, speaker, podcaster, and endurance athlete. I like to identify as a philanthropist as well, just by virtue of all the money I raise from the endurance events and training that I do. I am someone who spent 2 years in the Israeli military, infantry combat, and then I spent 3 years as a criminal prosecutor following 8 years of school, which was very interesting, college, law school, and business school. And after all that experience, 5 years public service, 2 different countries, I took my talents into the corporate space where now I work in the semiconductor industry as an associate general counsel, and I host a podcast called Inside the Inspired, interviewing high performers on the high performance mindset blueprint, specifically on the topic of mental toughness, in particular in the age of artificial intelligence. And largely what I'm about, what my mission is, I would say, is to help people find, discover their purpose, and understand that the best way to discover their purpose is through service, how they can go and volunteer their time, energy, money, and learn about themselves, acquire experience, and deliver their insights and wisdom that they acquire from that experience to people that need those services and values. And really what I'm about is just becoming a better person day after day and figuring out what I'm made of along the way.
Amazing. Basically tapping into our fullest potential.
That's it. And obviously, father, husband, brother, son. Those
There
elements
you
are
go.
very important as well.
There you go. Sounds like we have a lot of the same values since I call myself a family man when I have discussions with people.
I know you are. You have a few kids, right?
Yeah, there's three kids. Three kids. So,
It's a
and
lot.
they're becoming teenagers now as well. So it's
That's
kind of insane.
amazing, man. Congrats.
Appreciate that. So let's go a bit. You have a really extensive background. What is it that you're looking forward to now, moving forward into the next 5 years? Like, what are you excited about in terms of your what will you use your talents for, so to speak?
Oh, it's cool. Cool question. I think part of what I'm using my talents for right now, I segment my life into different buckets because I'm someone who had a lot of was spread very, very thin because I was always trying to fit in and trying to make the most of what other people thought of me instead of making the most of what I thought of me. And so now I really try to live a purpose-driven life in the sense that how can I identify the different areas of my life that I want to excel in. So at the end of every year and the start of every year, I segment my life into 2, 3 different buckets, which would be family, first and foremost. I mean, the type of person that I want to be. How can I show up as a father, as a husband, as a brother, as a son? That's very important to me. So personal, and then fitness is another element. What challenge am I going to take on that helps define my year, a misogi, if you will? What thing am I going to do that's going to differentiate me and help me level up so I can be better for the people in my life? And financially, how can I take more responsibility? How can I earn more? How can I save more? How can I effectively, and sometimes that comes down to learning more, right?
Hmm.
Reading more, doing more. And I think when I say doing more, it's about working smart. And I saw something the other day, you can't work smart till you've worked hard. So you have to kind of understand that when you hear all these things about, you know, 4 hour work week or 80-hour work week, right? Like you have to kind of work those 80 to 100 hours before you can understand what it means to really take things off your plate and be effective in the things that you're doing. But I guess we'll touch on that later. And So it's family, fitness, finance, and then habits I want to eliminate. So what am I doing that I want to take off my plate?
Mm,
And sometimes that could be, like alcohol. Some years it's been, or binge eating at night. That's what it was for this year, just because
mm.
I love to eat. Sleeping more, or not sleeping less, I guess you would say, right? In terms of how we're
Totally what you
eliminating
said,
things.
right?
So like those are kind of how I look at my life. And so over the course of the next few years, some things that I'm looking forward to are, you know, having more kids, growing my family, staying healthy, taking on challenges that don't compromise my longevity, and financially being stable and growing in a way that's responsible and informed when it comes to where the markets are going. If they're going down, how am I being physically responsible? If they're going up, how am I being physically responsible? What am I investing in? What am I staying astute and in tune with? I'm very I'm very calculated and strategic in how I go about my investments, and I only invest in what I know. So when someone comes to me with an idea that's outside the scope of my skill set, it could be the fanciest thing. Sometimes that's not the best idea, right?
Mm.
And so I try to be as responsible as I can and go with what I know and not necessarily always go with my gut, if that makes sense. I try to be as objective as I possibly can and as responsible as I possibly can. And so I'm looking forward to seeing where things go in terms of artificial intelligence in specific, because you have things like crypto, you have things like robots, you have things like, going to space, that I think over the next few years we're going to see a very massive wave of productivity, and part of what I'm concerned about but also excited about is this whole wave of how mental toughness can be this incredible resource in this age of AI, where because our lives are being made easier, I believe we have to get stronger. We can't be complacent. And so how are we going to be responsible during this time where we have a million reasons, not just the TV and the binge eating. It's not just that. It's like, and not just the work from home. It's like you literally don't even have to drive a car. Well, how can you use that time responsibly? Are you going to use it to scroll, or are you going to use it to invest, to study, to learn, right? So, and that takes effort, right? And that's where building that willpower, building that mindset, building that self-esteem, that self-love, to understand, like, because it takes effort, you can do better. So I'm excited about how people are going to tap into this resource of mental toughness over the next few years. I'm also excited about, in particular, where I could take my fitness. I think there'll be a lot of recovery tools that are coming out that people will learn, not just ice baths and saunas, but really you're really seeing this wave, or I'm seeing this wave of certain things going mainstream, where it's not just necessarily a trend to hop in an ice bath or a sauna, but fad diets are finally being called out, and I think that's become more mainstream. I think people are really starting to come around to drinking less alcohol. I think that reputation's kind of changed. So I think on the whole, like, there's a lot to look forward to between AI, healthier habits, lifestyles that we can look forward to over the next few years. And my skill set in specific is all about, amplifying that message and spreading awareness around these topics, because I believe that, like I said, if our lives are being made easier, that's not an excuse for us to kind of phone it in. It's a reason for us to level up.
There you go. I love that. The three F's of family, fitness, and finances. It's a very nice way of remembering it. I always talk about it on the channel. I say there's three categories of life. There's relationships, health, and finance, and it's
Oh yeah.
basically the same thing.
It is. I
Uh,
mean, you hear that all the time: health, wealth, relationships, right? The one thing I add is meaning.
yeah, there you go. You got to find your purpose. I can see you got a ton of books behind you, man. Like,
Yeah.
obviously you've been an avid reader like myself. Give us your top three. I'd love to hear it. If you can think of them. I know it's tough. Like, if someone asked me that question, I don't know if I'd be able
I think
to
it
come up with them
depends.
on the spot.
I think it depends where someone is in life, right? Like, I have someone ask me, like, what's the best business book? I
Right.
would argue, Patrick Bet-David's, because sometimes, I mean, here's the thing. Patrick Bet-David's 5 Moves Ahead, that one was really good, like just when it comes to business. But I was interviewing, and this episode's coming out tomorrow, Dr. John DeMartini, where he's read over like 31,000 books. It's not even an exaggeration. That's like, he's like, yeah, looks me in the eye, and he's like, 31,000. I'm like, oh my God. And so I've read like over 100, probably a couple hundred, I would say, maybe even a few hundred at this point. And sometimes I'll read more than one at a time, just because that's where I'm at in this stage. Sometimes I'll reread books, like I'll just open up one of these and I'll start reading for a few minutes. But I would say when it comes to like the top 3, and pardon me, let me go back to what I was saying about Dr. John DeMartini, where he's talking about he would read books and he would understand when they're used for commercial purposes, meaning someone publishes it for the sake of publishing a book. They're not necessarily like writing something that's contributing to like mankind, if you will.
I got you.
And he would notice that in certain books they refer to certain sources. So if you read a few different books and a few different people are pointing to a specific source, he used it as a trigger to go read that specific source. And I was like, oh my God, that resonates with me, because I remember reading 4-Hour Work Week, Aubrey Marcus's book, a bunch of Ryan Holiday books, and they were all talking about Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics. And so I was like, all right, I think it's time for me to go read Meditations. And so I'd read Meditations and I'd understand like, oh, wow, the change gets you closer to who you're supposed to be. Wow, I'm so happy like I read this. And, you know, just being able to sit down and learn those lessons directly from the source was valuable. So I would say, I'm not going to sit here and recommend Meditations, but I will say in terms of business, I would say thinking five Moves Ahead or Choose Your Enemies Wisely, either book by PBD, just because he's read hundreds of books and he synthesizes that information very effectively, we'll just say. And it's a very easy read. So if you're looking to level up your business knowledge, either of those 2 books are very good. I would say A Man's Search for Meaning.
By the way?
Pardon me?
Have you met PBD, by the way?
No. We've exchanged messages.
Okay, cool.
But not yet. At some point.
I've exchanged comments with him. I asked him a question one time in the comments, and he replied. And I was like, "Whoa, that's cool."
Yeah, no, it's really cool. He's the man. I'm definitely a fan of him, and I hope to meet him at some point.
Future's bright. Keep
and
going.
get him on the pod. That'd be awesome. So I would say either of his books. I would say Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, because that's all about a will to meaning and the value in establishing purpose in life. And that book was extremely transformative for me at a time that I needed to read it, because you learn that the survivors of the Holocaust, the ones that made it, the ones that versus the ones that didn't establish that will to meaning, establish that purpose in their life and found a reason to live and build a reason to live, and building purpose into your life instead of like constantly looking for it. It's like you can actually build it. So that was a very transformative read. Obviously, I can't believe I forgot this. The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. That's like without a doubt. Though I would say those 2, Man's Search for Meaning and Body Keeps the Score, either a PBD's book, just because I feel obligated to point people in the direction of like building business and building their business acumen. That's a great kind of starter.
I love that. I'm actually curious to hear, like a quick 20-second on Body Keeps the Score. What's
Sure.
that? I haven't heard of it before.
So it's an incredible book that I actually came across when I was a criminal prosecutor in the Bronx and I was SVU. So that book in particular is very informative for me, because at the time I also was working with victims of domestic violence. I was presenting in the grand jury. I was investigating cases, and it taught me a lot about trauma, what trauma is in the body. And it taught me about inner child work. It taught me about how trauma impacts the body. It taught me about the value of presence. I had studied Stoicism, but at the same time, understanding theoretically trauma is about what was or what could be, and therefore you're not focused on what is. And so any
Right.
kind of anxiety stems from a lack of presence. And so they give examples of how you can build. He gives examples like actual studies that were done, and veterans that they worked with, and victims of DV, childhood trauma, is my first introduction to inner child work, which was also very helpful. And we could talk a bit about that, my limited knowledge about it at least. And so it really taught me about empathy. It taught me about the value of presence. It taught me about the practical side of both of those concepts. It taught me about how to speak to my inner child. It taught me, which was funny because at the time I had a Whoop, which was tracking my heart rate variability, and I was, getting in great shape and just really starting to understand the way that things work. So that book was talking about heart rate variability as it pertained to victims of trauma. And
Interesting.
it was this crazy dichotomy of like, well, here we are talking about high performance with a fitness tracker, HRV is the main metric, and then he's talking about correlations of low HRV with people who suffer from these traumatic events, and what's going on over here. So I had experimented with meditation. I do not meditate, but I do a lot of breath work, and he talks about breath work too. But you see the value in lowering the heart rate and the correlations between a healthier state of mind, a lower heart rate, less anxiety, presence, the data to back it up. So like all of these things were being substantiated by my training, by my experience, by what I was reading, by my work that I was doing, and a platform to work with victims of DV, but also to practice these things on my own. So that book was a fantastic resource. It's a very dense book. I go back to it often. It's all marked up. Like it really is an incredible book.
Did it speak about how to like bring other people into the present? Because that's something that I'm working on at this point.
Sure. It gives good examples about the value of breath work and about the value of increasing self-awareness through body awareness, which is one of my favorite ideas from the book, where effectively, like, for example, the more core strength you build, the more self-awareness you develop, because everything's connected. So the more awareness you develop within your body, the more aware you become and acutely in tune with how you feel. So you're not thinking about what was or what could be, and therefore focused on what is. And so when you hear these concepts and practice these concepts, I was like, and I noticed and I remembered from when I first started to get into the shape that I'm in now, I remember the first time I felt my abs, I was like, oh my God, like this is a real thing. Like I'd never felt this muscle before, and it's a very, empowering feeling. So that book substantiated that idea. I felt better about myself. I felt more confident. I felt more aware. I was more in the present. I was like, I wanted more of this. I want to develop the other side of my abs. Like I want to have more awareness. And I just noticed that on my own. And then when I read it years later, it was like, I immediately thought to that moment where I was sitting at a desk and like touching my abs for the first time, being like, wow, that's never been there before. There's something here, So that started to really help me develop the correlations between resilience, self-awareness, body awareness, the value of presence, and becoming a better person.
Awesome. It's funny because like this is the first year that I've gotten like a constant six-pack abs. Like is like I'm 38. It's about time. I loved the Good to Great by Jim Collins.
I didn't read that.
Good to Great's fantastic.
I've heard of it though.
Yeah, no, it's a good one. And also How to Win Friends and Influence People.
It's a good one.
A big one.
I read that in law school. Easy read.
Easy read, yeah, exactly. And also Magic of Thinking Big. Like I also like that one.
I don't know it, but all those are concepts that are very near and dear to my heart, where like you have to learn how to think bigger. I'd read stuff like an essay like The Quantum Leap, or I'm trying to remember. But that whole concept of learning how to think bigger, I mean, that it it's so important because, like, I'll just give the example of, like, running further than you've ever run before in your entire life. Like, you start to see what's possible. You start to just think about things completely different and, like, changing your body. You're like, oh my God, like, if I could do this, I could do anything, right? And then you start to, like, realize, well, there's going to be a lot of pain associated with this transformation, but, like, that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. And then you start to distinguish between good pain, bad pain, suffering, and actual, like, you know, risk of long-term injury.
I
And,
kind of
like,
feel like I'm going through this exact period right now in many ways. But I think it kind of follows us as well, because every next level has a level of, you know, exactly the transformation you're talking about here, where you've got, yeah, like you said, where you can feel that this is next level for me. I got to go through it, and I know that it's gonna take this, etc., etc. It's like you begin to count the cost, and you
yeah,
understand what the cost is, and then
100%,
are you willing to do it? Are you willing to not do it? Type thing.
100%.
I'm going through that with calisthenics.
Great.
And right now that's why the abs, and also from DMs. Like, I'm very into sales right now, and so, like, talking to a certain number of people and strangers every single day and
It's
tracking
great.
it and all that stuff is it's going to the next level. I'm just taking one, like, I'm increasing by one every single day, and
Hell
so it
yeah.
gets tougher and tougher and tougher.
No, but that's good because you're not sitting there just reading about it, you're doing it, right? And I think that's what the biggest misconception is amongst a lot of people. You see a lot of people go through that spiral where,
Hmm.
like, they automatically assume. Sahil Bloom talks about this a bit, where he he's like, you know, when you're improving at something and you expect to just have that linear improvement, like, no, it's the same concept about healing, right? And the Body Keeps a Score is about this. It's like no one heals in a straight line, and when you improve, you're not necessarily going to improve in a straight line, but you may spiral up. And so, like,
Mm.
to follow that kind of trajectory is important. And I think instead of being stuck in that space of, I'm going to read every personal development book, read every podcast, listen to every influencer, listen to every Tony Robbins speech, etc., and not take any action. I mean, one awesome book I read by Brendan Burchard, High Performance Habits, I believe.
Mm.
He talks about, and this is my first introduction to personal development, I would say, from a theoretical perspective, is like that bottom of the funnel is self-awareness, and
Mm.
eventually comes like like clarity, uh, necessity, and action, and the rest of the high performance habits. And so I remember at one point, and I just happened to randomly open up his book. I was consuming and reading everything, but I was asking why I wasn't necessarily getting any progress. So even if I was adding to my trophy case of books, I wasn't necessarily seeing a correlation in the progress that I wanted to in my life, whether it was the amount of episodes I would record on the podcast, or you know, my fitness, or whatever it was. Even though I was showing up and doing those things, I didn't necessarily see that improvement. And so even if I'm being present doing all those things, what the book said when I randomly opened it that day was, it was a reread. Sometimes you can have too much clarity and not take enough action.
Mm.
Meaning you spend too much time trying to, like, get clear on what to do instead of follow through or just, like, take imperfect action. And so,
Yeah.
like, it's okay to fall forward and make mistakes, but it's not
Yeah.
okay to just sit there and not do anything about it. So I like you're doing with sending all those DMs, like, you're still making sure you improve at things. I think the main key takeaway is the action that you're taking versus, like, oh, I'm going to send 20 DMs and not send any of them, you know,
Mm.
because you have to go learn more about how to write the perfect DM, you know, like, I've I've sent out I've sent out cold messages for podcast guests, and, like, because I'm sending out so many, I've or like at that season of life, I've used the wrong name by accident. Like, for someone's book, like, oh, really appreciated your book. They didn't write a book, or like, oh, like, name the wrong book.
Yeah.
And I would say, like, there's a 10% response rate where, like, it's still about love to come on the podcast, even though, like, you got the name of my book wrong, you know, like, Okay. So there's still positive correlations, right? And you also learn what not to do, right? Like edit, read. So I would just harp on the action that you're taking. That's more what it's about.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the things that I actually speak about on my channel. I've mentioned it previously is I want people to take action. And so I'm always saying out with the information age and in with the implementation age.
Oh, great.
Uh, and uh, and one of the things with that is actually, if you've come to a certain amount of knowledge, like there's a point where you need to stop reading and apply so that you get to the same amount of application as you get, information. Because the more information you get without application, the less integrity you have, right? So it's kind of constantly a chase of being integral with what you know. It's kind of
100%.
how,
You put a
yeah,
witness on the stand in a case, for example. That witness is a professor. He's talking about, you know, all all the best ways to build a business and where this particular business went wrong. Cross examination. Attorney gets up and he's like, "Professor, have you ever built a business?"
right.
No. No further questions, Your Honor. So it doesn't
There
matter.
you go.
Right? All the
Excellent.
theory in the world, no action, no implementation. All the
Excellent
credibility is
analogy.
lost.
Then I wanted to ask you, what do you think is the fastest way for a newbie to get to the 80-hour work week? Because it's a strength, like anything else. It's not like you suddenly go from 0 to 80-hour work week and manage to hold that sustainably. What do you think would be the best and fastest way to get there, if that's what someone desires?
I mean, I guess it depends on what you consider work, right? Like, I'm working 80 hours, probably 100, but like, what is that? Right? Like, I can consider training part of my work. I can consider the podcast part of my work. I can consider
Hmm.
my coaching part of the work. But like, with all that, I'm definitely over 100 hours. But I would say, like, if you're looking to build that endurance, you have to find things that you love, that you're willing to commit to, that you don't consider work and you consider play, even if it is work. Like there's effort that goes into it, but you have to kind of reframe the approach that you're taking and not necessarily use the hours that you're working as a badge of honor. I never brag about how much I work. I think it's counterintuitive because at a point, a lot of the things that I do have lost relatability, and that can be intimidating. And part of it is that if you're working 80 hours but you're not seeing a correlative impact with whether that's in your income or you're exhausted, then you need to reassess things, right? You have to be smart about how you work the 80 hours. So you have to build things into your day that help you achieve a level of energy that allows you to perform at a high level and achieve disproportionate outcomes that are desired outcomes that you're after. So when it comes to working all those hours, I mean, for me, it was about proving myself in a lot of ways, right? Like I'd built up resilience through the military, through law school. Like I'm learning how to sit down and read a book, but like I didn't look at the book as work. I looked at it as a tool. I looked at it as play in a lot of ways. Like I read books that I wanted to read. I didn't read books for fun until after I graduated law school. I just didn't.
Hmm.
Maybe one or two. And that was like 27, 28 years worth. Maybe once or twice in the army I read a book, but I didn't finish a full book. And the first one I read was Treasure Island. I took the bar, bro. And the first book I read after I took the bar was Treasure Island. All right? Because it had been staring at me on my nightstand for years, saying, I'm going to read it, I'm going to read it. And then one day, I picked it up, and I was like, if I could read a law school book, take the bar, pass the bar, I could read Treasure Island. And I haven't stopped reading since. There hasn't been a day that I don't read
Hmm.
for the last, I've been practicing 6 years now. It just hasn't stopped. And so the fastest way is, and the reason that I haven't stopped is because I read things that I like to read.
Yeah.
And there's been momentum where I was like, oh, I started this book, I have to finish this book. But like, I've learned with time that when it comes to training, when it comes to working, when it comes to reading, you have to do what keeps you consistent. And for me, that's about doing things that I like to do. And then the question is, what are you optimizing for? Are you optimizing for net profit or net fulfillment? And so when you look at your life and the things that are built into your day, and you'll hear all these exercises of look at your calendar, highlight the things that give you energy in green, highlight the things that take away your energy in red. Those are all valuable exercises. I don't have the time or energy to go assess my calendar in that way right now. I just don't. I don't care enough to. I don't want to. But I have to ask myself, what am I optimizing for? Am I optimizing for making the most money, or am I optimizing for what fills my cup the most? And if I can be honest about that, then I can assess how I achieve the 80 hours. Am I going to chase that fulfillment for 80 hours a week? Am I going to chase profitability for 80 hours a week? Can I do a little bit of both? And I tend to fall in that both category, where I probably work about 55 to 60 hours on my day job, and then the rest is all my fulfillment, right? Like 10 hours worth of training, and then 10 hours worth of the pod. I tell people it's 4, but I definitely I definitely put in more time than that, just because it's on my mind, right? And you know, when I get to work with people and coach them, and I get to go and speak, like recently I spoke at Stanford on mental toughness in the age of AI, bar associations, other universities, and I would say when you're assessing those things, you have to ask yourself what you're really optimizing for. Are you chasing fulfillment, or are you chasing money? Because when you have that clarity, you can start to craft out not necessarily a plan, but a routine or a pattern that will help you achieve that outcome in a way that creates progress and momentum and results. Because if you're not optimizing for either of those two, then you're just kind of going in circles. You'll tire yourself out. And then you're working 80 hours, but you got nothing to show for it. So I would say kind of start there, and then do things that keep you consistent, and stop looking at everything like work. Try to build things into your life that are about play.
There you go. Fantastic answer. So, just going back to what you said earlier, you're working with semiconductors?
Yeah, well, manufacturing distribution of consumer and professional grade GPUs.
There you go. So, like in sales of that? Or
Sales, I do a few things at the company, PMY Technologies. We're a partner of NVIDIA, which I'm sure you've heard of. Everyone's heard of at this point for around 20 years. I've been on this train for about 20 years, I guess you could say. So it's funny. You can tell the difference between people who knew about it and who are just finding out about it based on how they pronounce NVIDIA. Some people will say NVIDIA. Some people will say NVIDIA. The newbies are like NVIDIA, and I'm like, oh, you just got here, bro. Like, that's a side note. But yes, I get to touch a few different areas of the business: sales, legal, litigation strategy. It's all encompassing business strategist, but the formal title is associate general counsel.
awesome. That's cool. And do you plan to stay there long term, or is your goal to exit into making the podcasts scaled, or work as a coach? Like, what do you think you're going to do?
I believe I'll be here long term, and the opportunity. I mean, for me right now, I'm on a rocket ship. Like, I had the opportunity to meet Jensen a couple months ago. You know, exchange a few words. You see where things are going, and I think that we live in an age where, because we can optimize for both, like, it's all about systems, right? So my podcast is beautiful. Speaking opportunities are amazing. And I believe that where I'm at right now, being paid to do both of these things is an extremely fulfilling element of my life. It wasn't always like this. I had to do a lot for free. I had to do a lot and volunteer my time, which I'm very big of, right? Purpose through service. like we were saying
Yep.
at the top.
Yeah.
But now I'm in a beautiful space where, I'm recognized for these contributions that I've made in one way or another, whether it's interviewing over 100 high performers, reading these hundreds of books, reading meta-analyses, and practicing these concepts that I talk about when I take on challenges like 1,018 pull-ups or 1,018 push-ups, running the Goggins challenge and adding miles. Now I'm training for a 58-mile ultra marathon. I've done a couple marathons also, and that's on 9/7. We're raising money again for the Friendship Circle, an organization that helps children who have special needs integrate into society by acquiring real life skills. And so when I do these things, like I want to walk the walk, and
Mm.
and so I build these things into my life to make sure like I'm leveling up and chasing a better version of myself. So I do believe that I'll be here because this is a place that believes in my future. I believe in the future of this company, and it also gives me latitude to continue to have conversations with high performers, authors, entrepreneurs, experts, and individuals that share their time with me and, be my community of high performers. And then I also get the chance to speak about these topics at universities and organizations that want to learn about how to build mental toughness and understanding it as a practice, not just, how can I grit my way through, but building self-belief, building self-love, building your self-talk, finding your purpose, having gratitude in your life, being present, redefining what mental toughness is specifically in the age of AI and why it's so important. So I do believe I'll be here, and I do believe that the opportunity to grow these things side by side will be really exciting.
There you go. Only through the 80-hour work week.
That's it.
That's it. I had one question. You play basketball, right?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I used to. I love the sport, but I don't play it as much anymore because I always got hurt.
Right, right. But from what I remember, I think we've had a conversation about you using it as therapy. Is that correct?
Not like you, man. You're up at like 3 o'clock in the morning shooting hoops, but like I definitely, there's always an element of therapy to shooting a basketball.
Literally, literally. Well, I mean, I stopped doing it early in the morning. I might start again, but for now, it's like maybe around 9 o'clock. I do an hour every day.
That's awesome. Are
Yeah.
you getting better?
To be honest, it's insane how good I'm becoming. Like, I thought I was a good shooter growing up, but then when you discover consistency and you discover doing it every day, and then instead of shooting randomly all over the court, you just choose three spots and you perfect those three
Oh,
spots.
cool.
And it's like, holy crap, like, how did I get here, Like, I wasn't this good 2 years ago, So
That's
it's
awesome.
fun. Yeah. Highly recommend actually doing that. If you want to become a good shooter, like pick the near basket, close to it, and just do it again and again and again. It's kind of like what Steph says that you don't go on the court when you go to practice. You don't shoot threes. You just you start up front at the basket, and then one step
Work
at a
your way
time you
back.
just scale out. Yeah. So it's funny. I'd like to thank you for joining the Men of High Value channel, man. It was awesome discussion, and love to do it again and hear what we have a lot of similar values, similar things
100%.
that we are discussing about. So
I appreciate
maybe
the time and the platform. Thank you.
you're absolutely welcome, man. So yeah, this is where we end, guys. Hope you guys subscribe and like, and I'll see you in the next one.